Just first off, I would have to disagree that it's the oldest profession. I feel like that would be a shepherd. Biblical characters were shepherds. They were selling the sheep. That was herding the sheep. That was kind of the oldest profession because the Bible is our oldest historical document. But I agree with you that it's not necessarily a debate about whether it's work or not. It's definitely a debate about should this be allowed in society? Should our government, how should they legislate certain things like this? Does the government have a hand in morality? And I would absolutely say that laws are morality in a sense, where the government does have a huge hand in protecting the vulnerable, protecting the weakest members of society from evils like prostitution, like sex trafficking. And a lot of these women, there's this lie that the majority of prostitutes are at will and that they're doing it like OnlyFans, but 1%, according to data from the Nordic model now, only 1% of all women in prostitution are at will, which means 99% of prostitutes are forced into it by their pimps. So I don't think that I think we should do everything we can to end this industry and to get women into safer lines of work and to stop men's demand for sex because they don't have a right to other people's sexual organs.
I'm not so, you both said that it's work. I'm not so convinced in a certain context that it is, because it's clearly distinct from what we describe as work.
Yeah.
And even the fact that it is illegal today, in many contexts, I think, is it legal in Nevada? I don't know.
It's legalized in Nevada, and in Chicago they have the Nordic model.
They have specific laws about it, though. In Nevada, it's only in towns that have residents and less than 400,000 members, and it's only within brothels. So you can't be on the street prostituting yourself.
Yeah,
so basically, survival sex workers are still fined and left with, no option if they can't get into the brothels. So.
They sort of work around it, I guess, because when you're in Vegas, you'll like come back to your hotel room and they push these cards under your door or whatever, and it's just like a bunch of scantily clad women on cards, and you're supposed to be like, ooh, which one will I pick or whatever.
Right.
And then of course they're doing like room calls and stuff. So I think everybody in Vegas knows it's illegal to do, but they all do it anyway.
Right.
But I guess my view is that, and we'll kick it off because I tweeted about this, and I guess mostly sex positive, like pro sex work leftists got really mad at me. Because I was seeing a lot of people say sex work is work. And so what I said was something like, if sex work was work, then a boss could require a female secretary to provide blowjobs as part of her job. That if it was the same thing as anything else, that if we were really just like, you can hire a janitor, you can hire a sex worker, what's the difference? It's all work. Then a boss could create a job description and say, I need someone to do my laundry.
If it is in the job description, I absolutely do agree that
they could do that.
If that was part of their job and they agreed to it, it was in their job description, they have consented to it.
Do you think a man should be allowed to request that, though? Do you think an employer?
Absolutely. I think men and women, both, because actually half of my, well, not anymore because I'm retired, but half of my clients were women. So it is not just men.
But a man in a position, I think within what you're saying, so I would disagree that it was work. I was just agreeing that the conversation right now is not necessarily is it work or not. But to speak on that point, I think it's work in the same way hiring a hitman is work, where you can hire anybody for a job.
I definitely don't think a victimless situation is comparable to murdering somebody.
I don't think prostitution is victimless at all. I think every single woman who involves themselves in prostitution is harmed, whether they want to admit it or not, psychologically, physically, mentally, emotionally.
Well, I mean, we could agree that with any job, you're definitely subject to some sort of mental and physical,
I would disagree. I have a job. I love it. I've been working in the political space.
I've been working in sex work for 10 years, and I've also been studying it for 10 years, and I'm doing pretty good myself. So
well, I'm not at risk to be violently attacked by a man in my line of work.
Absolutely. And this is the argument.
But real quick, what if you worked at a nightclub?
At a night, well, I personally would never, because I think it's very important for women. I was raised like this. I think it's extremely important for women to go out of their way to protect themselves and keep an eye out for their safety. I spoke about Brian with this on the way here, that in college, I went to University of Maryland, just nearby. I would never be alone in a room with a man that I don't know. I would never go on a date with somebody that I had never met and just meet up with them. There are so many ways that women can just be attacked, trafficked, hurt. And so I take extra precaution to make sure that I'm never putting myself in a position to be hurt. And I think prostitution actively puts a woman in the position to be taken advantage of, to be hurt in a way that professional jobs do not. They have protections.
I definitely don't disagree with you. So I want to make it clear that I absolutely do not encourage anybody under any circumstances to get into this industry right now, because it is unsafe and at least until it is decriminalized. Let's put it this way. At least until it is decriminalized, because that's where we start. When New Zealand decriminalized, and this is the gold standard, when New Zealand decriminalized sex work, this led to a immediate decrease in the amount of people partaking in consensual sex work. So even from a moral standpoint, if you want less people partaking in sex work, decriminalization is the only option. Legalization leads to more human trafficking. So that's obviously off the table.
So I wanted to go back to that point I was making about a boss having a job requirement. You said if they consent to it, it's totally fine. So here's the question I have. Do men and women, and I think the trope is predominantly women, sleep with their male bosses in exchange for promotions?
Yeah.
They do?
That happens
Just
anyways.
across, has that ever happened?
There's no law on the books that will stop that. Government cannot legislate morality. It is not going to happen.
But it is taboo.
Quid pro quo.
Right.
And
it should be. Quid pro quo should be. Like any sort of exploitation or coercion should be.
It should be.
Right.
Should be what?
So,
and it is.
Should be what?
not allowed, right?
Yes.
It should be frowned upon. Yeah, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, it should be frowned upon
Okay.
to coerce, exploit in any way, shape, or form. If somebody agrees to it as a consenting adult.
Well, but
of
these
course,
are.
I also believe that it should be 21 and up to get into any form of sex work. So.
But no, but if there's a female employee at a company and she does want to have sex with her boss and it does result in beneficial treatment and promotions, and they
then it's
consent.
not sex work.
I didn't say it was.
Okay.
I'm asking about this. The first question is, do men and women sleep with their bosses for benefits? It does tend to be women, stereotypically, I suppose. The answer is yes, they do. People will sleep with their bosses in exchange for benefits and promotion. A lot of the time, it is consensual. The woman says, like, I'm gonna, this guy, I like my boss, whatever, and then it results in beneficial treatment. So the question that I have, and there's a reason why I don't think sex work is it's clearly an act carried out between two consenting adults. I should say it could be. In many contexts, two consenting adults say, "Hey, we're gonna hook up. We're gonna exchange money," and then they do their thing. They go about their separate ways.
Right.
I don't see why that. It's kind of shocking to me that that's illegal in the sense that if a dude in a car pulled up to a woman and said, "Would you like to be my girlfriend? I'll take you out to dinner and give you an allowance to buy whatever you wanted," and she said, "Sure." And then they had sex. The difference between sex work is whether or not you decided it was a date or whether or not it was an exchange. So, but we'll come back to that. Here's my point. I believe that if we legalized sex work to the extent that it was treated like any other job, so a boss could say, "I'm hiring a secretary. I need my mail retrieved. I'm going to need phone calls answered, and I'm going to need sex acts performed on me." If that was allowed, then you will have, there may be a social stigma at first, but market competition will dictate that for women, guys are going to be demanding it.
And that you would have to provide that because if in a world, if that were to happen.
Well, you don't have to, but if you don't, you'll get fired and find
Yes.
another job.
You won't get hired at all.
You won't get hired
Right.
because some other girl, if you're saying I'm unwilling to do that, it's very easy for the boss to just say, "Okay, I'll find somebody who will."
Yep.
Right, and then it's very easy for that employee to go to somebody who doesn't demand it.
But
So
I
If men are
That's how
allowed
the
to
free market
demand
works.
it, I think that if you're allowed to get away with bad things, more people try to. I think that's just the way human nature is. Humans are not designed good by default. God designed us not to be good by default because you have to actively choose good to be a good person and get rewarded for the afterlife. So I think human nature defaults to wanting what's bad for us, essentially.
I don't think it's a want. I think it's a need. That's what survival sex work is. When it comes down to it, most people that are partaking in it are survival sex workers. So we can't forget about the fact that when you're in a position where you're starving and you're living in poverty and this is an option for you, very little people will say, "I'm not willing to do this and I'm not willing to feed myself and keep myself alive because God told me no."
Well, I think it's for the men.
When it comes down to
I
it.
was
Men
thinking
too.
about the men in,
I mean,
the
gay
men in
men
the
too.
power position. I'm saying asking for, if a man was allowed to ask for a secretary who performed sex acts, I think human nature would cause almost all men in the position, barring a few good ones, to ask for that.
it'd be a cultural norm.
I mean, this isn't a
Exactly.
legalized situation, and that's not at all what I support. I don't support it to be legalized because, of course, like I said earlier, the human trafficking has already been proven to increase in Germany and
When it is legalized.
yes,
Oh,
when
wow.
it is legalized. So that's why I support full decriminalization. And I, like you were saying,
Wait. Hold on, I'm sorry.
I need a clarification.
you're-
What's the difference between decriminalization and legalization? Is that not the same thing?
no. So decriminalization is basically removing all punitive laws and regulations. There's no over policing. So basically, if a sex worker is in a position where she is abused or exploited, she could feel comfortable to call the police and not fear arrest.
What's legalization then?
Legalization is you have to work under, you have to work in a brothel. If
Oh,
you're
like
not,
regulation.
right. There's complete overregulation. Cops are still going out of their way to, like, if they find somebody who's working as a survival sex worker, they'll say, I will offer you this, that, or the other, some sort of bribe or coercion. And, like, basically rape them in exchange for lesser charges.